what we're going to speak about, a little bit of an introduction. I was thinking, there's a famous word, the name of the Zohar, Yisrael v'oraisa v'kuchrichu chatu, the Aramaic. Yisrael, the Jewish people, Oraisa, in Aramaic means the Torah, it's the illuminator, the Kuchabrichu, and the Holy Blessed One is all one. We're all intertwined. The Jewish people, the Torah, and God Himself. What does that mean? God is God, we are we, and the Torah is the Torah. We're all one. The understanding is that through the Torah, we are intermeshed with God. That due to the Torah, that gives us the capacity to cleave to God. Without it, we wouldn't be able to. What does that mean? Well, we do His will, we have a relationship. What does it exactly mean? We find the beginning of creation, God said to His heavenly retinue, let us make man in our image, in our form. That's a verse in the Torah. Now, the obvious question is, God has no image, He has no form. God is infinite. God is not finite, so He has no form, and He has no image. Image means you visualize a certain shape. It begins and it stops. But if God is infinite, what does it mean we're creating man in His image, in His form? It means we possess something which reflects God. What is that? So we've mentioned in the past, the Sepharno, in his commentary on that pasuk, on that verse, explains that just as God does as He chooses, whatever He feels fit at that time, because God is absolute, God gave that ability to the human being to choose as he wishes. So the characteristic of free choice, that we're not locked in to a certain function, behavior pattern, that is a characteristic of God. We say everything's predestined except fear of God, because that's one's choice. Based on the degree that you fear God, that will be the basis for every decision we make in life. It's subject to that level of fear, reverence, whatever way you term it to be. So as God chooses to do as He wishes, we also have the ability to choose as we wish. Our behavior is not limited to instinctive behavior based on our DNA. And that's why we're worthy if we make the right choice, and we're culpable if we make the wrong choice. Because it's only due to our own initiative we succeed or we fail. That's the profile, that's the image of God. We possess God's image. Okay? God originally created Adam. Adam was the ultimate person who's the image of God in terms of this characteristic. He was nearly perfect. He had one challenge, not to eat of the tree of knowledge, because it possesses unadulterated evil. It's the tree of good and evil. He failed. When he failed, not only did he not succeed, did he use the attribute or endowment of choice to advance himself. By failing and choosing to do the wrong thing, he destroyed his whole persona of spirituality. He took it down to the lowest level. Now what happens, the spiritual profile of humanity has to be rebuilt almost from scratch. That was how devastating the result of ingesting the evil and intermeshing it into the human being. And since the world itself was only created to accommodate and facilitate the choices of the human being. So since he utilized that medium for evil, every aspect of existence was touched and tainted with evil. So Adam now has been disenfranchised. He's no longer Adam. He's no longer the one who has the responsibility to use the attribute of choice to reconstruct and rebuild and advance the spirituality of the world. He's been disenfranchised. We, the Jewish people at Sinai, and every nation in the world was given a choice. Do you want to be that nation to recreate and rebuild and reestablish the spirituality that was taken down and advance it, or you choose not to be? All nations were chose not to be. The Jewish people at Sinai, because we descend from Adam, from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs, we had the level of understanding and humility that we took advantage of that moment. And we said, definitely, we accept, even though we don't know the extent of that, what it takes, we accept unequivocally. That was Nasa Nishmat Sinai. God says, now going forth, you're Adam, you're Adam. And now the choices you will make, which man only assumed that profile of choice, which reflects God's characteristic of choice, will manifest itself through you. In what context is that choice effective and applicable? Within the context of Torah. So why was man endowed with the ability to choose? To reflect God's profile of choice. Now, what's choice? People believe a lot of things. They believe what they do is right. But what choice is the correct choice, which reflects God's profile of making the right choice? That's within the context of Torah. So how do we express and actualize and advance and refine the bestowment, endowment of choice, which is God's profile? In what context? By choosing within the context of Torah. As a result of this, Yisrael v'oraisa v'kutshem richuchatu, the Jewish people and the Torah and God are one. Because how do we reflect God's profile of choice? It's through the Torah. So when we utilize it and we actualize it through Torah, then we reflect and magnify God's profile of holiness. Because that choice was applied properly to be utilized as God endowed it to be used. So that's the understanding of Yisrael v'oraisa v'kutshem richuchatu. God, the Jewish people with the Torah and God become one. Because we were only creating the profile of God to be able to cleave to God, to become subsumed by God, to be able to attach ourselves. But that's only if you actually utilize and actualize that characteristic, that bestowment, that endowment, as God wants you within the context of spirituality. So if we were the only ones who were eligible and qualified, because we said Nasa Nishma, therefore the Jewish people and God are one as a result of this. That's the way I understand it. Okay? There's an expression, one is given his marching orders. You know? You're a private, you have certain marching orders. You're the sergeant, you have other marching orders. You're the lieutenant. I was never in the armed forces. You have other marching, you're a second lieutenant. You're lieutenant colonel, other marching orders. Colonel, Brigadier general, 1 star, 2 star, 3, 5. Everybody has different marching orders. Based on your capability, you have different levels of responsibility. At Sinai, every Jew now being chosen as the Adam, you will address what's meant to be accomplished in creation, but now it's a different level of accomplishment. When Adam was created initially, the world was nearly perfect. He had to advance it to the perfect level. Now it's a whole different responsibility. It's much more than that. First, we have to correct the damage. Could you imagine that the higher the building, the deeper is the foundation? Could you imagine how deep the foundation for the Empire State Building was, or for the Twin Towers? It's not to believe how deep that, because that foundation has to be able to hold up the structure which towers way up there. The crater after Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the atom bomb, supposedly the crater was a mile wide, and I'm not sure how deep it was. Before we start building on that location, that site, first we have to take away all the atomic effect, the radioactivity, that a human being can't even go near there. Then we have to fill in that depression, which is, I don't know how deep and how wide. And after we finish deactivating it, filling the depression, then we start talking about building. The objective of the Jewish people and the purpose is we have to correct the damage. The damage is unending, what he created. Nobody really addressed it. We as Adam, having the capacity, we begin addressing the damage. It's not only damage control, we have to take the damage and correct the damage. And after we correct the damage, then we have to bring it to a level of perfection. So 2 things are going on simultaneously. Filling of the gap, so to say, filling of the hole, the depression, that the world should be viable. And on top of that, utilizing it to bring it to that level, which initially was meant to be brought to that level. That is the responsibility of the Jewish people. And that's what it means. I've created this world for my glory, and the only ones who are able to bring about that glory are only Jewish people, because that can only be brought about within the context of the choice, which we reflect the profile of God, which is free choice. And their free choice is within the context and within the parameters of Torah itself. We come to Sinai. Each Jew, 600,000 males above the age of 20. Each Jew is given his marching orders. Every soul that will ever be born, including the converts that are eventually going to convert to Judaism, which are part of this equation, they're at Sinai. Everyone is given its marching orders, what it's meant to accomplish, how to address it, how to address the deficiencies, the damage, and how to address the advancement. To bring it above, from sub-zero, subterranean to terrain, and above the ground. And to build it into something which soars out of this existence. Which the world is ready for a new creation. Based on the levels of accomplishment. It's just, we're talking in the 8,000 year, the recreation of that perfect world, which initially, this world could have been that, which it wasn't. It failed. So every one of us, give you an example. You ever see the, when they pour a foundation, you can only put as much cement into the foundation based on the depth of the foundation. A foundation which is 2 feet deep, you can't put in more than two feet of cement. And if you have a foundation which is a mile deep, you're putting in a lot of cement in that foundation to fill in that depression, the depth of that foundation. The world itself, the way it operates and functions, God wills positive energy. But the world itself doesn't have the capacity to receive that energy because the world itself is damaged. Meaning like this, if I have a vessel which doesn't have a bottom to it, whatever I put into that vessel, where's it going? It's running out. So what do you have to? You have to seal the vessel. And even when you seal it, there's pressure on the walls in the bottom. You have to strengthen those walls and the bottom to be able to deal with the intensity of the weight of whatever goes in there, that the wall shouldn't collapse and the bottom shouldn't fall out. So who does all this shoring up and this securing? The one who understands how to deal with it and how to address the weaknesses and deficiencies. But who's given this responsibility? The Jewish people. We have to create a capacity, a potential in existence that God can now will energies to make a correction on those deficiencies. So we prepare the world for God's energy to repair the damage through our choices. And when it reaches a certain level, not only repairing it, we're advancing it. That eventually we're going to achieve what? A level of perfection that the world is ready for real time, which is the coming of Mashiach, where God will reveal himself and ultimately the world will be an appropriate location for God's presence to be in this world. God will be recognized as the only omnipotent, only power, only source of everything after the coming of Mashiach. What's all evil will be expunged from this existence. This is the concept. So who is the major contributor to preparing the world to have a capacity to receive all these energies, to correct the damage and to advance it beyond? These are the tzaddikim. The tzaddikim are not on the plateau mode. They're always churning out, working, investing, choosing continuously as the mentor choose based on their own initiative, because free choice is up to each individual. It's not predestined. As Adam's profile was free choice, that's the profile of God, to do as you choose to do. He made the wrong choice. God always makes the right choice. But God does not see as choice, because God's absolute. So there's no choice for us. There's always a certain grayness, because we're subject to the evil inclination. With God, there's no choice. God is everything absolute. But with us, being human, having this limitation, the only reason why our choice has value is because despite the lack of clarity, we've made that great level, Herculean decision to do what we should be doing. That's the understanding. The Talmud tells us in one location, Sanhedrin, that when evil are awake, the evil people, it's not good for them, it's not good for the world. It's better they should be sleeping. And tzaddikim, when they sleep, it's not good for them, it's not good for the world either. Why? Because the tzaddik, when he's awake and fully functioning, what's he occupied in? Only in constructive behavior. Every decision, because he's a tzaddik, is a contributing decision. His action makes the world worthy of a greater level of infusion of positive energy, which corrects the damage and allows the correction to go forward, the advancement to go forward. The evil person, what does he do? When he's sleeping, he's dormant. It's like a person you give money to invest. You say, thank God it's a day off, the market's closed, because if the market be open, we'd be hemorrhaging. The hemorrhage stops 2 days a week when the market is closed. So we make more by you not working than by working. The Russia, the evil person, when he's functional, he's a detriment to the world and to himself. So it's in his best interest to sleep and for the world that he should be sleeping. The tzaddik, because of the way he contributes and utilizes his ability, he contributes to himself and he contributes to the world. He's a tremendous asset. That's the difference. To be able to appreciate the concept which Yaakov Avinu had established between two of his sons, two tribes, Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun was the tribe that was designated by Yaakov to be fully responsible for all financial needs and material needs for Yisachar. Yisachar was designated only to study Torah. There should be no distraction whatsoever. He has no worry or care or concern for any material he needs, whether it's his residence, whether it's his clothing, whether it's his food, whether anything. Doesn't have to think about it. To the degree that Zvulun, in the words of the Midrash, he literally puts the food into the mouth of Yisachar. Other than closing your mouth and chewing and swallowing, Yisachar has no concern or no worry for any of his material needs. Now, why did Yaakov choose Zvulun for that task, for that responsibility? You know what level of appreciation you have to for Torah? To be able to be dedicated at that level, not to allow Yisachar to be distracted for a moment from his Torah studies. If you appreciate what that is, I'll give you an example. Avram, it was the third day after circumcision. He's 99 years old. And he's having a conversation with God. Because you have a greater moment of opportunity. God himself is communicating with you. He's a prophet. It was the hottest day in existence. Avram Avinu was looking in every direction. There are no wayfarers. And all of a sudden he sees 3 wayfarers coming down the road. What does he say to God? Excuse me. We have to interrupt our conversation. I have to take care of the wayfarers. So what's the takeaway from here? So the Talmud tells us, from here we learn, greater is the value of hosting guests than receiving the divine presence. Why? Because if the divine presence is the ultimate, how did Avram interrupt his conversation with God to take a break to attend to the needs of these wayfarers? So evidently, must be attending to the needs of the wayfarers has greater value than having communication with God. Otherwise, Avram couldn't have interrupted the conversation. What does this mean? How's that possible? 3 pagans walking down the road on a hot day. He has to offer water. They should wash their feet. Because he's concerned they're idolaters. He tells them to rest under the shade of his tree, gives them bread, slaughters calves for them. This has greater value than having a conversation with God, a communication, prophetic conversation with God. But evidently it does. Otherwise, he would have interrupted the conversation. So we explained it, meaning, I gave an example. You have a person who owns a company, he's the chairman of the board, and he has a senior executive. And he calls up a senior executive, says, could you come to my office? I want to speak to you about something very important. He says, Mr. Smith, I'm preoccupied. He says, what do you mean preoccupied? I'm asking you to come. I own the company. I run the company. You tell me you're preoccupied. So he says, could you please explain yourself? He says, no, of course I will explain myself. I'm waiting on our best customer, and it's the best interest of the company that I don't interrupt what I'm doing now to have the conversation with you. So this is in the best interest of the company. So, if that's the case, attend to the best customer. What was the objective of Avram hosting the angels, hosting wayfarers? Every wayfarer who came into his home, who was hosted by Avram, he entered a pagan. At the end of the night, he was a full committed monotheist. So what was he doing? He was doing God's mission. He was committed to God's mission every moment of the day. So God says, of course, we're having conversation. But if that's why you're interrupting it for that, and that's the objective, of course you do that. Because that's the purpose of existence. That's the concept. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Avraham understood what the marching orders were. Zvulun had an appreciation for Torah at a level that all the brothers did not have. Therefore, only he could put himself out to that degree, to be dedicated, that even to put food in Yisochar's mouth to that degree. Sometimes he says, I think I've done enough. Let him do something for himself. Let him work an honest day in his own life. Do I have to provide? It's not a question. If that man is the rainmaker and he's churning out value there's nothing compared to that value, I'm more than happy to be the one to accommodate him, that he should not be distracted, because ultimately we're all beneficiaries of this. But who has that capacity to internalize it, to understand it at that level? Yaakov, evaluating his children, understood the only one who has that capacity and that appreciation is only Zvulun. Therefore, Zvulun was dedicated to whatever was needed to provide for Yisachar, not to be distracted. He was there. The tzaddik, we have a choice in life. You go to Atlantic City, you can be sitting at the blackjack table. You can be sipping whatever you sip there. And you can have this beautiful view of who knows what. I'm sure the closest thing to that is what they call Gehenna. 5-star. But the alternative is what? To open a Torah book, the Talmud, and delve and do things which produce unfathomable results. Who is that? Who has that? Who's that understanding? Who has that appreciation? You have the tzaddik. The tzaddik was spiritualized. He has a level of clarity that he can make that decision. He can make that leap. Despite all the distraction, he has that focus. He's giving the world the capacity that when now God, he unleashes energies which correct the damage, but he's creating that capacity. Therefore, when he sleeps, it's not in his best interest, it's not in the interest of the world, because that puts things on hold to a degree. No, it's interesting. Based on the verse in Prophets, the Navi says, the prophet says, the name of God, in Lobrisi Yom V'loilo, if my bris, my confidence of Torah would not be in effect day and night, the world would not exist. Could you imagine? Person needs an infusion of blood, transfusion. And only after the transfusion is finished, they seal the opening where the person receives the blood, and it has to coagulate. Otherwise, the person bleeds to death. What would be, they put in tremendous amount of blood in a person through transfusion, and immediately the blood leaks out. So God says, my Torah has to be in effect continuously. There can't be a moment, there can't be a gap. You know why? Because there has to be that ongoing infusion. Because if there's ever a gap, what's going to counter the evil? The evil immediately comes in and it just implodes, explodes. The world can't continue. You have to have that continuous infusion. You're chipping away at it continuously. 24 hours, 7 until coming of Mashiach. From Sinai till Mashiach, it's continuous. If there's any hesitation, any moment of void, the house comes down. Person's on a heart lung machine. The instruction is, you cannot shut off that machine, not for a moment. If there's a power outage, you have to have generators immediately coming on to fill in that heart lung machine continues. Other person dies. That's exactly existence. We have to address the damage going back from the beginning of time. We're filling in that hole. The hole is deeper than what? Than the foundation for the Twin Towers. And we've been doing this for centuries and millennia. Because we keep going back and forth. We fail, we succeed. Hopefully we're on the upswing. And we're still filling it in. When we study the Torah, when we do mitzvahs, you wear tefillin, you say the Shema, you believe in God. The 13 tenets of Jewish belief. This all addresses the damage. That makes us eligible for those energies, to correct the deficiencies within ourselves and to have opportunity to advance ourselves. That's the reality of our existence. But all those marching orders, every soul at Sinai, based on its spiritual profile, was given its marching orders. And when it makes certain decisions, it's eligible to receive certain energies to be able to utilize them to actualize whatever has to be actualized.